So today we're going to be looking at all of the Mythical Island cards, and I've kind of grouped them a little bit more differently. So whenever trying to rank something, if for instance you have a look at kind of like the normal collection, if you go to advanced searches on TCG card, you'll be able to go with the expansions. And when it comes to the likes of Execute, obviously Snivy, Servine, there's not really a rank for them because realistically we're all trying to get to Cyperia, we're trying to get Executor, trying to get to Rapidash, so I thought I'd cut the middleman out unless that Pokemon is going to be more of a main stage. So a perfect example of this is going to be someone like Salandit, a great Pokemon that can be utilized without going up into Salazzle. So it's just an extra little bit there that you might use that purely on the fact that obviously if you are doing it, if your opponent's active Pokemon is poisoned, this attack does 40 more damage. So it's going to be great if you are combining something like that, which is a colourless attack as well, with something like a Weezing or a Grimer that can obviously do the poisoning. So we're kind of utilising it like that in this instance. So straight off the bat, I think for me the easiest S that I can give out this time round is going to be Gyarados. I think it's a cracking card. It works really, really well. There's very little disadvantage with Gyarados. I think it's a perfect upgrade compared to what we had in most of the water types in Genetic Apex. Now hopefully when we come to do this for the next set, we get even better cards. Obviously when we look at the likes of Celebi and also Seviper, or Cyperia, sorry, I think they are good. I think they are fantastic. I don't know if I'd go quite in the S category. I would probably be looking more towards an A. I think both of them are fantastic in any sort of tournament basis. We've seen them win tournaments and we've also seen them lose or come third, fourth, fifth. But predominantly, the main ones still hold. The Mewtwo's, the Pikachu's, Gyarados is quite up there as well. And then we look at like going a bit further down with the Charizard and Moltres. So I would have them more towards an S to A level. And I'm gonna stick with an A for them. Now, obviously, you could argue between the two of them. I think if we were going to revise this list, they're probably two of the better cards from here. So we'll keep them in S and we'll have a look at the end because I must admit, they are very good when it comes to tournament bases as well, and this is kind of what they're utilized for. When we look a bit further down, obviously you've got like the Executor. I think this one is nice. I do like the EX as much as, again, that's going for more RNG and does give the 2 points. I think it's a lot easier to utilize the EX alongside a Celebi and a Cyperia than it is with this one personally, taking up 4 of them energies. And even if you have Seviper or Cyperia, you're having, I don't know why I keep calling it that, you obviously then still need the 2 on there as well. We then throw in a bit more. We've obviously got the likes of a Pikachu, which is just a little bit of a watered down version of the EX. Personally for me, I'd probably be looking slap bang in the middle because I think it's a great one for an early access if maybe you don't quite have kind of the EX available. The only issue I have, in fact, I'm going to go one down, is the problem you have is if you've got the choice between this and the EX, you're always choosing the EX. And then also if it's the fact that you don't have necessarily the greatest amount of bench Pokemon, this is still not going to do that great amount of damage. When you look at the likes of a Farfetch that can do 40 with one hit, colourless, so it can be put into any deck and still has the same HP. I know this one personally is going to be more based around the Raichu. I think the Raichu is an absolute brilliant one and we'll kind of go on to that as well. It is just a fantastic upgrade into the Raichu. The Pikachu just on its own, I'd say is a C. Throwing it in with the Raichu, I think the Raichu is great with a Giga Shock, obviously doing the 60 damage. It's a brilliant one to have. We also then have the Vaporeon, which is a brand new one with the ability Washout. That one for me is going to be fantastic with that ability specifically with what it can bring in the future. That's it. Right now it's brilliant for obviously the Gyarados, for bringing the water energies to the front. That's going to be fantastic, but obviously it's going to have more ability going forward as well with the new expansion. Always going to be nice to be able to be used. Obviously, we'll throw in the Mew as well. I think that one's quite an easy one in terms of the EX. It's a fantastic one with attacking ability. It's 20 on the second turn anyway. If you're obviously going second, you can straight away start using that, which then builds up your Mewtwo because it's still got the ability then to be able to have the free energies on it, just start doing the hacking, but then also having the Mewtwo building up in the back as well. Or you can utilize it in other stuff. The colourless hacking is a great thing to have across a few different decks if you need it as well. We also then have the likes of, I think it's Delmise, I want to say, obviously coming in with the Energy Whip. If this Pokemon has at least 3 extra energy attached, this attack does 70 more damage, meaning obviously you're going to do yourself a little cheeky 90. Does require a little bit of setup, it's 100 HP, so it's kind of them bog standard. It's not quite in the A, but it's a nice one to have if you are looking with the Cyperia there. You could have it on the bench as almost a little bit of a tank, but then if you do put the 2 energy on it, plus then the extra, well, you'd have to have 3 extra. So yeah, so I suppose if you have the 2 energy, then obviously it would give it 4, meaning you could utilize that as a decent one. I really do like, it is Shinatic. Again, I'm going to butcher a lot of these names. I do think this one has got some sort of ability. It is mainly the asleep more than anything. Flickering Spores obviously does 50. Then obviously your opponent's active Pokemon is now asleep. I'm okay with asleep decks. I don't think it's necessarily the biggest. Mainly the HP is going to let it down slightly. And obviously the previous one, Morlul, with obviously the 20 RAM with just 1 energy and 60. It's one of them ones that I think we've got a lot of kind of Pokemon that could put things to a sleep. And I'd possibly not bring this down. If I'm using a grass deck, it's predominantly going to be Celebi, Cyperia, and Executor, and then maybe Delmise throwing itself in there. Adding another double evolution might just water down the deck that little bit too much for my liking. We then throw in a little bit of fire. Obviously, Rapidash going to be quite a good one. And to be fair, we've got Ponyta also with Stomp. If it is heads, the attack does 30 more damage, meaning it's a 40. Very high on obviously the RNG there. When we look at obviously Rapidash, if it's head, it does 60 more damage for 2 energy. It's not the worst in the world, to be honest. I think for me, that's going to be one of the better ones. Being able to do that amount of damage very early on, 100 HP is nice. Adding then the extra 60 min and it could do 100. It's pretty decent across the board. Magmar. Now, Magmar is going to be better once we get Magmortar in here as well. The problem with this one for me is 80 HP. Then you've obviously got the 2 energy for the Fire Blast. Unless you've got like an infinity Moltres that keeps going, discarding the 2 energy every time for the 80, it's a last ditch attempt. It's not going to be a consistent Pokemon unless you had like a guard where it gives you a fire energy every single time and you throw your second one on. It's not enough HP. It's a great attack with 2 energy, but it's very much a last ditch challenge before you swap into something or before it's going to take you out. And that's really all it's going to be for. We then have Volcarona coming in with a free, discard 2 energy from this Pokemon. This attack does 80 damage to one of your opponent's Pokemon. It's nice. Again, discarding 2 of the energy. It's not necessarily my favorite. It's unless we have something that gives it consistent energy, and if we are using the Moltres as that example, you're probably not running Volcarona. You're running an Arcanine. You're running a Charizard that does far more damage for a lot more of the attack, in my opinion anyway. Salandit I quite like with the ability, especially if you do bring it in with obviously a poison type. The damage is pretty consistent with just 1 colorless. Obviously you're doing a 50 if they are poisoned. They more than likely would retreat at that point, but it's nice to have in if you have that ability to be able to do it. Obviously with Salazzle, you're obviously coming in then, your Pokemon would be poisoned. It does the 30 damage, but it's the poison that works. At that point, you can't then bring in Salandit without having like a double on it. So I'd put it around about the same for that reason alone. Throwing in some of the water then, we have Lumineon, who has definitely been featured a lot more recently. This attack does 50 damage to one of your opponent's bench Pokemon. It's great to have as kind of like an extra. If someone's retreating everything, you can throw that in with the double water, and it does a little bit of damage. Now again, it's going to be more B tier more than anything. It's not going to be on the offensive side. It's going to be a strategic Pokemon thrown in. We then have the likes of Dreadnought that comes in. Again, not a bad one. It's got Crunch for 70. Flip a coin. If it heads, your opponent gets rid of a random energy from their active Pokemon. It's okay. We have then Cramorant, I think is how you pronounce it. You've got Dive coming in with flip a coin. If heads during your opponent's next turn, prevents all damage and from and effects of attacks done to this Pokemon. Going a bit of kind of more towards your almost RNG ability more than anything. I'm not necessarily a big fan of doing that for everything, especially if you are running tournaments. The last thing you want in a quarterfinal, a way to qualify, a final, is to go off a coin flip. That for me is definitely not the way to go, in my opinion. Very much like Magmar, we have got Electabuzz. Obviously, this one does damage to 40 of one of your opponent's Pokemon. I quite like, personally, I think it's kind of in that just about tier. I would say this again is going to be a fantastic one once we get Electivire. I can imagine that will be a great evolution shout that you can go with. We then have Galvantula. That's coming in with the second tier, coming in with 2 energies for Electro Web, 70, and during your opponent's next turn, the defending Pokemon can't retreat. Very good for an electric deck if you want to throw that in. I think, again, it's not necessarily the biggest kind of one that I would go for the offensive, but I would be looking at it kind of more towards as a support tier as well. Dedenne is frustrating as ever. I'd go here again because it seems to be some Pokemon just have the ability to always get the heads. Honestly, and it was only today that I came up 4 paralyzed in a row. I literally could not do a single thing. Which then we throw in a bit of Mew. It's not quite the normal Mew. It is the non-EX version, obviously coming in for Psy Report. Your opponent reveals their hand. It's not necessarily my personal cup of tea. I think it's an okay card. It's going to be a very kind of last ditch. It's almost like having an extra Mewtwo. You have the normal one so that you can throw in the EX after. It's pretty much what you're going to do. And maybe it's got some play in very, very strategic games, but it's not going to be the one I personally go for. Sigilyph would definitely go in the B with draw a card. It's pretty standard, does 10, has 80 HP, and it just draws a card. That mixed in with a few of the other Psychic decks, absolutely fantastic. We then throw in a little bit of Florges, Florges is the one we've gone for. Heal 20 damage from your Pokemon, 80 on it, 2 energies, 120. It's a second stage evolution, I would call it a third stage, but the final form, a second stage. It's solid. It's nothing really too crazy in my opinion. I'd possibly go kind of like not ranked here. It does the damage, but realistically, when you're using a Psychic deck, it's just not going to be there in my opinion. We then also have, I can never pronounce this card, Beheeyem. Again, butchered. I know Elgamy, that's about it. But this Pokemon does 20 more damage for each of your opponent's bench. It's very good if you've got somebody that's stacking up quite well. Obviously, Elgamy, you're not necessarily going to choose massively, so I would be looking more towards the low. We also do have Flabebe, who can be used as obviously it can put Pokemon to be asleep. Does only have the 40 HP, so it's going to be very, very bog standard to have. Slurpuff coming in with a magical shot. Honestly, it's probably one of the ones that even if you do have it in, it's got no ability as well. At least with kind of like the heal, you've got the report, you've got being asleep. This literally is just a 60 and that's it. It's not going to be the one for me. We then have a Mankey that does 50 if you do, flip a coin. If it gets tails, the attack does nothing. But if it gets heads, it does 50 on the very first turn. But it was also pretty decent to have when it comes to the Primeape as well. A first stage evolution with a 50 hit. Obviously, it's only 1 energy as well, so very easy to set up. If you have this on your second to go, if you're second... so on your first turn, you go in second, basically. You get tails on the flip. You then go to your next turn, your second turn, you can start doing 50. Now, obviously, the HP isn't great, so it's why it's not personally in the A for me, but it's just a decent one to have for the fighting ability. Quite an easy one here. We've obviously got the Golem, the Aerodactyl, and the Marshadow. Absolutely fantastic ones. You've also then got Stonjourner as well that you could throw in for the fighting. That's coming in with a Mega Kick at 90. Again, I'd probably put that with the HP and the attack into a very support category, whereas Marshadow, the revenge attack of 100 is brilliant. You've got Golem, who is an absolute tank with the guard press, actually making the Golem evolution line way, way better. Obviously, if you do the attack as well, your next opponent's attack does 30 less. Brilliant. And then Aerodactyl comes in with the ability to not have to evolve their active Pokemon whilst it's in play. Love it. And obviously then having the Land Crush as well. Very easy to get on there. Throwing in a few of the darks, obviously we've got quite a lot of Pokemon in the previous evolution that did really well. Coffin obviously comes, put 1 random Coffin from your deck onto your bench. It's a solid one. It's not necessarily anything that's going to be crazy. I do prefer the other one. Weezing with no ability. Again, it's one of them that I think is slightly a bit better. This one personally, during your opponent's next turn, if the defending Pokemon tries to use an attack, your opponent flips a coin, and if tails, the attack doesn't happen. It's a nice ability, but it's going to be very much bog standard in comparison to the poison one previously. We then have Purloin's evolution, no thank you. We then also have Whirlipede and also Scolipede, I want to say you do it. Whirlipede obviously comes in, your attack is now poisoned, and then obviously with the next one, your opponent's active Pokemon is, if your opponent's active Pokemon is poisoned, this attack does 50 more damage. Could do really well as a kind of duo pair here. I would put both of them into the B, just because you've almost got the poison and then onto the poison attack if they've not moved it out. So it's great to keep it at Whirlipede as long as they're not attacking, and then go for the Scolipede if they do keep that Pokemon in, and pretty much everything would be absolutely done. We have Druddigon, outrageously good. Love this Pokemon. Tried it with an evolution deck. It's there. It's a little bit there, but as a tank Pokemon, one of the best. Absolutely love it. Pidgeot as well, another stunning one if you can get it right. Obviously, Scattering Cyclone is going to be the attack of 80, and this attack does 20 more damage for each of your opponent's bench Pokemon as well. So if you can get this in whilst they're heavy on that, it's a very good one. We then throw in a bit of Tauros. Absolutely love this one. Obviously does the extra 80 damage if your Pokemon is going against an EX. It's brilliant to try and take out that with obviously the free energy type. It's great if obviously they bring a Pikachu EX, a Mewtwo in, and you can obviously do yourselves the 120 if they are an EX. That takes out pretty much most. 130 with a Giovanni. Nearly takes out some of the big boys. Mewtwo obviously with a 150, but it would take out a Celebi with your Giovanni. Same with the Mew. Unfortunately, Pidgeot has got a massive HP, and it would be 10 off with a Giovanni for the Aerodactyl. So coming in for only a 1-point loss, Tauros does a heck of a damage. This EV coming in as well with obviously the continuous steps. Every heads it gets, it does 20. And again, very much like Dedenne, it just keeps happening. It just does not give up, honestly. A very, very good RNG basis EV, and I don't know if that's just against me, but it obviously sets up the evolutions as well. And then we also have Chatot, Mimic, shuffle your hand into your deck, draw a card for each card in your opponent's hand. Not really going to happen, which leaves us with some of the actual benefits. So blue, for me, actually does work out quite well in some scenarios. I don't think it's necessarily one you use all the time, but it can work quite well. We have got Leaf. I think that is a pretty top tier one when it comes to dealing with the high level decks. Possibly go even one lower, I think, actually. I think Mythical Slab, with the ability that has as an item, works really, really well. When it comes to the Poker Flute, put a basic Pokemon from your opponent's discard pile onto their bench. It has got some use, but I'd say it'd be very bog standard. I think maybe it'd be closer to the non-rank personally. And then one that I'm seeing more and more, put your Mew EX in the active spot into your hand. This is great if you've, say, got already a deck set up, you throw in a Mew, it takes damage, put the Budding Expeditioner in, and it brings it back out. You can put it back onto the bench with a full HP. That in the right hands can be very good as well. So that's going to be everything from Mythical Island. Let me know your thoughts about them, and I'll catch you for the next one. Peace.